So I've got a basketball here, and that's because my favorite sport is basketball. I've loved basketball since I was a little kid, and the first time I ever started playing basketball on a team, I was in third grade. And I don't know if you've ever watched third graders play basketball before, but as you know, because you all were in third grade once, you're not very tall when you're in third grade, and you're not very strong when you're in third grade, and both of those are kind of key components for the sport of basketball, because the whole goal is to throw a ball up into a high hoop. So when you're in third grade playing basketball, the only way you can do that is to take the ball, bring it way down low from here, and just push up as hard as you can and hope that you can get it to the basket. So while I was playing, that's how I shot the ball. I'd go outside to the hoop in our driveway all the time, and I'd practice this way over and over and over again. And that's the habit that I developed. That was the shot that I developed. And so when I got into junior high and I started playing on teams, it was a bit taller, it was a bit stronger, the competition was a bit better. And what you learn is that once you're starting to get to this level, you can't shoot the ball from way down here anymore. Why? Yeah, because if you're bringing it way down here, it's pretty easy for someone to just go like that and swat the ball away. So what they teach you is that you have to take the ball, you have to hold it up above your head and shoot like this. So the problem is I had developed this habit from shooting a different way over and over and over again. And as I tried to develop this new way of shooting, I missed a really important component. I missed the fact that every time you're supposed to shoot the ball, you're supposed to get some good spin on it. And so if you can imagine, like when the ball is going towards the basket and it's supposed to be looking like this, mine was looking like this. And so I was missing almost every shot that I put up. And I was talking to my coaches. I said, what is the problem that I'm missing all of these shots? And they said, well, the problem is you don't have any spin on the ball when you shoot it. And so I started practicing. But it was really hard for me because I had developed this habit from shooting over and over and over again the wrong way. So I started going out into my driveway, and I simply started like this. I would stand on my driveway, I'd hold the ball in one hand, and I'd just go like this and catch the ball. Over and over again. I did that for days and days and days. And then I added another step. I would stand next to the basket, and I would do the same thing, but this time, I would try to make it into the hoop with the basket right next to me. Did that for days and days and days. Then I added another step. I added my other hand right next to the basket for days and days and days. Then I stepped back. More days. Stepped a little further. More days. Got to the free throw line. More days. Finally to the three-point line. Eventually I got to the point where I had gotten the spin so well on my shot that I was making more baskets than anyone else on my team. And so I wanted to be the kind of person who had a good shot, who made a lot of baskets, but also that couldn't just happen overnight. In fact, it couldn't even happen from me spending an entire day shooting over and over in my driveway. It only was able to happen from me spending hours and hours over days and days that took several months before I was able to develop this new habit. And I think for a lot of us, we want to develop good habits. We want to get rid of bad habits, and we imagine ourselves in these big moments in life. And we think about the kind of person we want to be. We think about how we want to respond to certain situations. And so maybe we want to be people who are successful. Or maybe we want to be people who make a difference. We want to be people who defend those who can't defend themselves. Or we want to be people who step out in faith. We want to be people who change the world. But the question is, how do we get there? How do we become those kinds of people? And so I said that my all-time favorite sport is basketball. And if you know anything about basketball, maybe you've heard the name before, Kobe. Kobe Bryant, right? One of the greatest basketball players of all time, one of the most known names. I've got a picture of him here that'll come up on the screen. And if you don't know anything about Kobe Bryant, here's the thing. He was a person who went to the NBA, became a professional straight out of high school. That doesn't happen very often, that you're so good that out of high school you get to become a professional. He won 5 championships, 2 finals MVPs, 1 regular season MVP, was an all-star 18 different times, a dunk contest winner. But here's something that maybe you didn't know about Kobe Bryant. When he was 12 years old, he went to a summer basketball camp, and he made 0 shots. Now, I don't just mean like the first day of camp he made 0 shots. He made 0 shots the entire camp. But he decided that the kind of person he wanted to be was a great basketball player. And so he is known for his legendary work ethic. And so when he was in high school, what he would do is he would show up to the high school at 5 a.m. and he would practice all the way until classes started. He would go to classes all day and then go back to the gym and practice till 7 p.m. and then go home. And he would do this every single day. His high school teammates tell these stories about how after practice was over, he would make them play him one-on-one. But he would make them play to 100. Now imagine, I don't know if you've ever played like basketball with someone, but if you think about how long it would take for one person to score 100 points in a game, that would take a long time. He would make them play him one-on-one to 100. Now, when he got drafted and went to the NBA, you would hear these stories about how players would show up, and Kobe had already been there in the gym practicing for hours and hours. There's stories about how people would walk in and they would just hear this sound of a ball bouncing in the dark because he got there even before the people who show up to turn the lights on. You hear stories about him going in and looking crazy because he was just running around in circles without a ball. But that's because he was practicing even without the ball of where he needed to move on the court, how he would shoot. And probably the most amazing story happened in the year 2012 when Kobe played on the USA Olympic basketball team. Now, at this point, he was 34 years old, which in itself isn't that old, but for a professional basketball player, that's getting towards the end of your career. He had already won 5 championships. He had already won 2 gold medals from the previous 2 Olympics. And so he was a very accomplished player. He's in Las Vegas with the other best players in the NBA preparing for the Olympics. And at 4:45 a.m., his trainer gets a call. Kobe says, "Hey, can you come to the gym? Help me work out." Trainer says, "Sure, I'll be right there." The trainer gets there at 5 a.m. Kobe is already drenched in sweat. He's clearly been there for several hours, already working out before 5 a.m. They spend the next 2 hours working on conditioning and weightlifting. So at this point, it's like 7 a.m. The trainer says, "Hey, we've got practice at 11 o'clock. I'm going to go get a couple more hours of sleep before I come back." So the trainer comes back at 11 o'clock, and Kobe's still there, shooting. The trainer says, "Hey, what time did you leave to go back to the hotel?" Kobe says, "What are you talking about? I didn't leave." He said, "I wanted to stay until I made 800 shots." So at this point, by 5 a.m., he had already been working enough that he was covered in sweat. He did conditioning and weightlifting for 2 hours. He spent the next 4 hours making 800 shots, and then all of that was before their 11 o'clock practice even started for the day. See, when it comes to these defining moments that Kobe had, winning championships, getting drafted out of high school, winning gold medals, they didn't just happen because he had natural talent. They didn't just happen because he really wanted it to. They happened because he did something over and over and over and over again. He developed these habits that would define how he responded in these big moments. He knew who he wanted to be. So my question that I have for all of us tonight, myself included, is who do we want to be as a follower of Jesus? What kind of follower of Jesus do we want to be? How do we want to respond in these defining spiritual moments? What kind of faith do we want to have? And so to begin to answer that question, I want us to look at the life of Jesus. So I want to share this short story with you from the book of Luke, and it's in chapter 22. And when we get to this story in the book of Luke, right before this, Jesus has just had his last meal with his disciples, with his followers, and he's getting ready to be arrested. He's getting ready to face the cross. And we read this short story that begins like this. In Luke 22, verse 39, it says, Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. And I want to stop right there for a second. That phrase, as usual, the word that Luke uses there in Greek, it's the word ethos, and what it literally means is a habit. Something you do over and over and over again. Jesus went, as was his habit, to the Mount of Olives. His disciples followed him. Now, what does he do there? This is the place Jesus regularly goes to pray and to spend time with God. That's his habit. It's what he does over and over and over again. So then how will this habit cause him to respond in the defining moments? Let's see what happens next. Verse 40. On reaching the place, he said to them, to his disciples, pray that you will not fall into temptation. Then he withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them. He knelt down and he prayed, Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done. So an angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him, and being in anguish, he prayed even more earnestly. His sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. So they get to this place, and Jesus tells his disciples, model after me. Do what I'm doing. You have seen that my habit is to regularly take time to pray and be with God. You need to develop this same habit. Because the disciples are going to face some huge defining moments. They're going to have these huge defining moments. How are they going to respond in faith? So Jesus says, start preparing now. Start preparing now. And Jesus knows what's coming. And so what does he do? He does what he's always done. Because he's formed this habit. And so his first reaction is to spend time in prayer and with God about it. He knows what's coming. He knows he's going to face the cross. And what does he say? Not my will, but yours be done. Guys, that kind of faith does not just develop overnight. That's something that happens from doing something over and over and over again, developing these habits. So Jesus went to a mountain to pray, as was his habit. And out of the habit, he's strengthened. But then here's what we see next in verse 45. Remember, he just said to his disciples, do the same thing so that when these big moments come for you, you don't fall into temptation. But verse 45, when he rose from prayer, he went back to the disciples and he found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. Why are you sleeping? He asked them. Get up and pray so you won't fall into temptation. They're asleep. Are you kidding me? He says to them, what are you doing? Guys, there's going to be these big, huge defining moments you're about to face. You need to start developing these habits now. And instead, you're sleeping. It says, get up and pray. Start building these habits right now. Otherwise, you're going to fall to temptation. Otherwise, you are going to crumble when these big faith moments arrive. Why? Here's why. Because what you do in the defining moments of your life will be the sum of all the little things you've done along the way. Let me say that again. What you do in the defining moments of your life will be the sum of all the little things you've done along the way. And when we look at all the little things we are doing along the way, I wonder, would Jesus say the same thing to us that he says to these disciples? Remember, he says to the disciples, what are you doing? There's these huge faith moments coming and you're sleeping? Would he say to us, what are you doing? You're talking about who you want to be. There's these huge defining moments going to come in your life, and you're spending all your time playing video games every day. You're constantly talking bad about people. Like you're spending all your time full of anger and negativity. Your face is always buried in a screen. He's saying start building some new habits now, otherwise you are going to fall to temptation. You are going to crumble when these big faith moments come. See, you may not know this, but I found this really interesting. When we form habits, there's some really interesting stuff that happens in the brain. You ready to get sciencey with me? Yeah? Okay, here we go. So, check this out. There's two separate parts in your brain that work for the decisions you make versus the habits that you form. It's why you don't have to make a conscious decision to blink or to breathe, because a different part of your brain takes over for habits. So maybe if you're a person who drives or has started learning how to drive, the very first time you drive, you have to consciously think about every single thing you're doing, every turn you're making, what your foot is doing on the gas and the brake, all of these things. But after you've been driving time and time again, all of a sudden that moves over to the habit part of your brain. And that's why for people who have been driving for a while, you can be driving while you're focused on having a conversation with someone, or while you're listening to your favorite song or a podcast without getting into a wreck. Because it's two different parts of your brain doing two different things. And here's the reason why this is so important. These little things that you're doing over and over and over again, they're creating pathways. They are wiring your brain to dictate how you will respond in these defining moments. So when we get to these big moments, we think, oh, well, I know that if I faced that, I would respond this way. I know this is what I would decide to do. But the problem is, you don't necessarily get to decide what you're going to do, because the habit part of your brain is going to take over and respond the way it's always responded because of the habits you've formed. So when you imagine who you want to be, when you imagine how you want to be, you need to consider, what are you doing right now over and over again in your life? And this goes both ways. So maybe your habit is like what Jesus talked about. It's prayer. It's spending time with God. This is something you do every day, over and over and over again. Well, what people have found is that when you pray over and over again, when you spend time with God regularly, the part of your brain that develops compassion, that develops empathy, that develops love, it increases. It lowers stress and anxiety. It lowers your blood pressure. All of these things develop in our brains if we spend 30 minutes a day or more in prayer and with God. So these things we do over and over again cause us to respond with love, with compassion, with empathy. But it also goes the other way. Maybe you're thinking, this is the kind of person I want to be in a relationship with a boyfriend or girlfriend, or one day with a husband or wife. This is how I want to respond in these defining moments. But instead, we're developing this habit every day over and over again of images we're filling our minds with on the internet. And that starts to wire your brain to think a different way. It can have devastating impacts on the future relationships you have. The things you're doing over and over again are developing habits that are going to dictate how you respond to huge moments in your future. So again, what kind of person are you setting yourself up to be? What kind of decisions are you setting yourself up to make? And maybe you look at that and you're like, well, then what do I do? Because I've been developing these bad habits over and over again. And if that's you, I want to share with you is that there's always hope. There's always hope. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is 2 Corinthians 5:17, and here's what it says. It says, anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone, and a new life has begun. Science confirms this too. The brain can be rewired. We can become new people. We can break bad habits, but it takes work to build good ones. It takes work to break bad ones. Something that we do over and over again. So what I want us to consider tonight is when we look at our lives, we consider the things we're doing over and over again, day in and day out. Who are we setting ourselves up to be? When we think about who we want to be and how we want to respond in these defining moments, if we know that how we respond will be the sum of all these little things we've done along the way, what type of people are we becoming? As we continue in worship tonight, we're going to sing this song called Build My Life. And the song says this really powerful thing when it gets to the bridge. It says, I will build my life on your love. And I love that image in the song, this idea that when we think about who we're becoming, the things we do over and over again, that we want to build our lives, build our habits around God's love. And so what I want to invite you to do tonight as we sing this song is you can simply come up here. We're going to have some scissors here. And all of these strings on this heart represent God's love that we want to build our lives on, that we want to build our habits upon. And if that's something that you want to do, you can simply cut off a piece of the yarn. And there's a lot of different things you can do with it. You could tie it around your wrist. You could keep it in your pocket. You can do whatever. Put it somewhere where you're going to see it regularly. And let it be a reminder to you as you're going throughout your day at school, at home, of what kinds of things am I doing over and over again? What kind of person am I becoming? Am I building my life around God's love? Because how we respond in the defining moments of our lives will be the sum of all the little things we've done along the way. So I want you guys to stand. We're going to pray together. And then if that's the commitment you want to make, you can move forward as we sing this next song. Let's pray. God, we thank you for who you are. We thank you that through Jesus there's always hope, that we can become new. And so I pray that we would be challenged to consider who we're becoming by the little things we're doing over and over again along the way. And that instead of building destructive habits, that we would build our lives and our habits around you, Jesus, and your love. It's in your name we pray. Amen.